Welcome to the Plant-Based Podcast. Did you know that plants are truly amazing? Not only can you grow them and eat them, you can also wear them, drink them, nourish your skin with them, and so much more. Let Ellen and Michael inspire you to love plants as much as they do, as they chat with the movers and shakers in this wonderful plant-based world. So, let's dig in.
This episode of the Plant-Based Podcast is brought to you by our friends at Cobra. The Cobra range of garden machinery is constantly expanding and offers the UK's largest range of lawnmowers. With a comprehensive lineup of quality and innovative petrol, electric, battery and cordless products to tackle any gardening task, Cobra is the newest evolution in garden machinery. Visit cobragarden.co.uk for your chance to win a variety of great Cobra products.
So on the podcast today, it's all about grass. Well, lawns, actually. We've got Glynn Smith, who's the head gardener of Erddig, which is a National Trust Estate and Gardens in wonderful Wrexham, which is in North Wales. And I know I'm looking forward to this because lawn care is something that can be really confusing. And I'm especially excited because I'm wondering if Glynn is able to persuade Michael that he should have a lawn in his garden.
Somebody once said to me that they were fed up taking weeds out of their lawn. So he was going to grow a clover lawn and he spent the rest of his life taking grass out of it.
I love that.
That's cool. Welcome, Glynn. Great to have you here today. One of the reasons I don't have a lawn is I feel like it's hard work, but hopefully you're going to convince us otherwise. But let's kick off. Part one, we talk about you and kind of what you're up to. And then part two is always the take home. So that's when we get all the lovely tips on how to save those brown lawns. But first up, Glynn, tell us about your horticultural career and when you started at Erddig. I hope I've said that right, Erddig?
Erddig, double D in Welsh is spelled TH or pronounced TH in English, so it's Erddig.
Erddig. Oh, yeah. Good. I'm glad.
But that's not where I started off. I left school at 16, and about 3 days later, I started work with the Peterborough City Parks Department as an apprentice. Oh. So I spent 4 years on the Parks Department, working in various aspects, whether it's amenity areas or sports fields, before I wondered what to do next. So having passed my city and guilds, it was stage 1 and 2 in those days. I saw the parks director and he suggested that I apply to work at Kew Gardens. And I was very lucky to obtain a position there in the herbaceous and alpine department, where I started off on the herbaceous borders before moving to what was called the decorative unit. That didn't mean we stood around looking pretty, but it meant that we did all the bedding plants in front of the palm house front. Okay. And we had the Cambridge cottage herbaceous borders. But my real love was the garden behind Kew Palace, which was a pastiche of a 17th century garden that was made there back in the early 1980s.
Wow.
Having spent about 8 years at Kew, working my way up to be a section supervisor, I then thought, well, there's a lot of dead men's shoes from now on, so I ought to get out, get more experience. And so I applied for this position up at Erddig as head gardener. And I meant to go back a couple of years later, perhaps, but ended up getting married and putting down roots here. And I've been head gardener at Erddig for 35 years now.
Wow, 35 years. You must love it there then.
Well, it's my garden now. It's not a National Trust garden.
Yeah, of course.
But of course, all the my comes with all the problems of where do you ask staff to work and what tasks you prioritise at any one time.
So as head gardener, I guess that a lot of the work isn't actually gardening. You must have to do quite a lot of admin and people management and that kind of thing too.
Yes, that is always it. And over the last year, of course, we've had the pandemic. So I was the only gardener here from the end of March last year till beginning of July. And then we started to call back gardeners one at a time to help out because things sort of got on top of me somewhat. And so really the gardeners had quite a rest over the last 12 months. And now we're starting to pick up the pieces and get them back to some semblance of a presentationable standard.
Oh. What was that noise?
Are you saying... Are you saying that you didn't enjoy mowing the lawn by yourself?
Well, it's quite therapeutic when you actually get hands-on in a garden. You could be anywhere in a garden. When you're out there working away, you're your own boss. You put in your own effort. You always try to achieve the standards that you would love to achieve. William Morris, I think, said that if you put something of yourself into everything you do, it will come out really well. Otherwise, work is just drudgery. So many of the horticultural tasks are very menial, but of course you can see an end to sweeping and tidying and weeding, and it gives you such satisfaction working outdoors in a garden.
I quite agree. I think even if the tasks seem very menial, small, it's nurturing something, isn't it? And you can see satisfaction both quite quickly when you garden, but also long term as well, depending on what job you're doing. And I think you can't beat that. I just don't think you can beat that.
Oh, it's great. And in this last year, so many people have suffered with well-being issues that, in a way, the garden has kept me sane. I've been doing my job. I've been out of doors, and things have been fine for me. And I'm sure for other people who have picked up their hobbies, whether it's gardening or crafts or anything else, those sort of things have been focuses in over the last year where everything has come to a sudden full stop, an emergency stop, really. Well, we're slowly coming out of it.
I do find it a little bit strange that, they obviously stopped gardeners going to work, but it's quite a solitary job anyway, so you wouldn't have really been near anybody else. But yeah.
True, but there's been a lot of retrenching in the National Trust over the last year. Quite a lot of people have been made redundant, and it's been a very traumatic time for very many people within the trust, and also our visitors, because they've had their memberships and the whole place suddenly closed down.
Yeah. A time like no other, really, isn't it?
Yeah, we've kept our estate open, so many people have discovered parts of the estate, walking, cycling, whatever. Yeah.
So tell us about the estate. Paint a picture of it for our listeners. Kind of, is it big, small? Is there a main house, or what's it?
Yes, we have a house centrally. Erddig Hall, which was built in 1685 for a gentleman called Joshua Edisbury. He had invested in lead mining and coal mining, but that eventually produced disastrous results, and he became bankrupt. A lawyer called John Mellor acquired the property, and he set about extending the house, adding wings on either side. This would be about 1718 to 1730, and he extended the garden to the extent that we see today. So from a fairly formal small garden, a gentry garden of the late 17th century, walled, with lots of fruit trees in, it's very difficult to tell the precise details, because it's only a little sketch really of the garden, to John Mellor's design, which is more architecturally and professionally drawn, with large areas of grass and water features. And this is a late gentry style garden of the sort of William and Mary period. So you've got William of Orange coming over to this country. William was a gardener, and there was a sort of renaissance of gardening at that time, and changes too. We sit at the very end of the formal walled gardens, where you tended to be private and look into the garden. And just the very start of the landscape period, where we're starting to look outwards over estate land and farmland. So it was all about status at that time and impressing visitors. So if you had the invention of the ha-ha, so there were you didn't have to have a wall to prevent livestock getting into the garden from the estate. You could get views out across your estate to say, look how much I own. If you placed your best livestock in the field, where people could see it, they might say, well, you can afford lots of staff to grow the crops, to feed the animals, and you're a very good farmer. And when you turn backwards and look at the house up through the garden, you see massive amounts of lawn. And this was 100 years before the invention of the lawnmower. So everything would have had to be scythed and rolled. And so that would take quite a large workforce to grow the crops, the fruit, and look after the grounds.
Oh, I can imagine.
So I wouldn't mind growing the crops, but I wouldn't want to be dealing with all of that lawn without a mower.
Lawns, non-maintenance.
Well, that's true. As well as feature lawns that you would look out on, there was also a bowling green, so that would have had to be kept uber sharp for bowling along. We don't know who designed Mellor's garden. It could have been Mellor himself. It could have been his agent and gardeners. He could have visited friends and other properties and got ideas from them. But it's a very formal layout. There are two main upper lawns, two lower lawns in the middle of the garden. There are 4 orchard blocks on either side of those. And on the lower half of the garden, there's a central canal. It's a formal sided water feature, not one that you get narrow boats on. And even the ownership of private water at that time was quite a status symbol. When you think of all the diseases around, like cholera and typhoid from the water supplies that the Vox Populi had in towns. And we have lots of orchards areas in the garden. We actually grow about 200 different varieties of apple alone.
Oh, how wonderful.
We've been planting a new orchard of Welsh cider apple and perry pear trees. So in the future, maybe about 5 or 10 years' time, we could be making our own cider and perry. But that sort of dictates our gardening year as well. So in the springtime, we've got a little bit of spring bedding. The herbaceous borders hold us at the moment whilst we're changing the bedding over to the summer display. The formality of the garden in the wintertime with hedges, and we have 165 pleached lime trees on either side of the garden. And that would take, say, one of the skilled gardeners approximately 10 weeks if he were to do it on his own, to prune them all by secateurs back to a couple of buds and thin them out. And each of the 6 horizontal tiers of branches is grafted to its neighbour to make a continuous linear hedge on legs. There's a tremendous amount of work. The best time of year, of course, is harvest time, when we have our apple event in the autumn, an apple festival really, where we try to display as many of the varieties we have grown that year, and also to sell excess fruit to the visitor. tastings, and we give advice as well as to how people could have a go. Let's face it, there's only about 8 varieties of apples that you can obtain in supermarkets and farm shops. And to see 150 or more in a display, and all the subtle names from cat's head and ancient deccio right through to the lords and ladies, and even modern varieties like scrumptious and Falstaff.
Oh, it must be wonderful. Like, it sounds idyllic. It really does. It sounds really absolutely lovely. You have, like, I have got beautiful pictures in my mind now. And you're in North Wales, which is actually really far for me to go. But it's making me feel like I want to take the trip.
This year, it's so difficult to travel far or abroad. And so maybe North Wales would be your little jewellery stop.
I have seen quite a few videos over the past month or so, more than ever before, of visitors to Wales. And I have been to Wales a couple of times, actually south though, not north. And it just looks absolutely fabulous. And it looks, why do we need to go abroad when we have such beautiful places to visit in the UK, actually?
Yeah, we've got a good catchment area of gardens up here. There's the ones in Cheshire, which are like Tatton Park, Dunham Massey, Speke Hall, Rufford Old Hall. You come down into North Wales with ourselves and Chirk Castle, a little bit south to Attingham Park. On the North Wales coast, you've got Bodnant. You've got Powys Castle a little bit further south from us, Plasnewydd, and a lovely little garden, Plasin Rhew, up on the Llŷn Peninsula. It's a lovely place, and all the coastline and the mountains. And if it's a rainy day, you can always go to Chester or Manchester or Liverpool for a bit of shopping.
Well, I mean, it sounds like the perfect holiday spot, doesn't it? So now everyone's just going to be heading to North Wales.
Well, if they couldn't get into Cornwall, maybe they'll come and see us.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, now we've got a great, thank you so much of giving us that picture, of your background and the gardens as well where you work. Sounds wonderful. Let's talk about lawns. Now, I don't know. Tell us, first of all, about the NHS lawn that you mowed. So I don't know what this is at all.
Right. Last summer, I was sympathetic to everything that was going on, people clapping outside houses for the NHS workers, and people like Captain Tom doing his walking. And I thought I would just wondered what I could do. And on the west side of the house here, we have a dramatic bank escarpment. And I thought perhaps I could put a heart and the initials NHS there. And so I set it all out with strings, which took me about an hour, and then spent time mowing it so that the lettering was very, very short and the surrounding grass a little bit longer. And people out in the parkland walking there could read our support for all the NHS and other essential workers across the country. And from that, some of our volunteers were making ear loops and goodie bags for NHS workers to go to those working in the hospital, the ear loops to help them with the pressure from their masks, which were cutting into their faces and ears. Some of our gift food from our gift shop that was coming towards the end of its use-by dates was passed over to the NHS and to food banks. So lots of people contributed in their own little ways, and it gave everybody something to do, really.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's lovely, obviously, that you supported the NHS, but also through gardening and mowing the lawn. What a great way to do that.
Yeah. And some people did things in smaller ways that could be seen from the windows of their houses. And others hung things from trees. So it all helps to keep us together as one community.
Oh, that's really cool.
It is really cool.
A couple more questions in part one, and then we're going to move on to those tips that you can use at home. But first, before Ellen asks you quite a sensitive question, I'm going to just ask you about lawns in general and kind of tell us about the maintenance that you've got there. How big is the team to take care of all of those lawns that you've got there?
Right. At the moment, there's myself and 3 gardeners, full-time gardeners. Obviously, last year they were furloughed. This year, the full team have been in since late November, so we are catching up on a lot of things, and lawns have had to be prioritised this year, but we're starting to get them back under control, you could say. Okay. We've been doing what you could call a little bit of holiday gardening, in that we see people in their gardens, they mow the lawn down before they go on holiday. When they come back, they've got to immediately get out there because they've grown like stink, and they cut them down really hard again to get them back under control. So that's the sort of thing we have had to do, but it's not always a good thing to do for lawns, to stress them. They do need feeding. I was talking to a gentleman the other week who said, oh, what nice lawns you've got. I said, yes, they're 300 years old. Oh, next year, he says, I'm going to have a lawn as good as yours. Well, it just goes to show that it is a long-term cultivation thing. So starting off at late summer is a really good time to improve your lawn. So at this time of year, you would perhaps scratch out or scarify some of the dead grass that has settled down into the base of the lawn.
So how many people do you have doing that where you are? Like, for people in their back gardens, we'll go through that in part 2 to give some great tips. But on such kind of a large estate like you have, how do you do it?
If you had a golf course and you had to hit a standard, obviously you'd put all your resources onto doing tasks like that. At Erddig, we don't always have those resources. Staff are hedge cutting and doing other tasks around the garden. We do have volunteers that will help, but we also have machines that can help us. Like we have our own scarifying machine. It's a pedestrian-operated one, about 24 inches wide. So that gives us a good size of machine to use, but it would still take us several days to do a sizable lawn, usually in 2 different directions, so that you get the maximum of the litter out of the base of the lawn. But you can rent from hire shops small versions of this if you have a large lawn. If you've got a very tiny lawn, a wire rake will do the task.
Right.
You can also...
So it's basically all people and machinery. It's having the right equipment and people power as well.
Yeah, that's it always means that you've got to put some effort in, I'm afraid. And,
well, that's
shoulder muscles, yes.
That's why I don't have a lawn, Ellen Mary.
That's gardening for you. Michael likes lazy gardening. So just before we finish up part 1, I just have one very last question to ask you. After you've done all of the work that you've done on the lawns at your site, does it upset you when people walk on them?
No, grass is there just to keep the ground together underneath. We don't play tennis and cricket on grass. We actually play it on the ground that's underneath. So the grass is there to hold things together. So I don't mind people picnicking on the lawns or walking on them. Where they cut corners, that can wear out more, or if they make a pathway through a consistent pathway through a lawn will wear it out. Gateways and entrances. So you do have to feed the lawn there a little bit more and look after it a little bit better. But lawns are meant to be there to be walked on, and not that we don't have the signs up that say keep off the grass anymore.
I often see those.
Yeah.
I often see those and I often think, but I want to take my shoes off and run on the grass. That's like the best thing to do.
Of course, lawn chemicals are another tool of the gardener. So you can, if you have lawn weeds, and if you do really want to keep them out, I actually quite like a few daisies in the lawn.
Yeah.
And to see a bumblebee there on a bit of clover or something is a great addition. But you can get lawn weed killers to apply to kill, say, dandelions. And
I don't want to hear that, Glynn. Yeah. I don't want to know about that. Let's talk about that in part 2. Let's talk about feeding and weeding and how to save a brown lawn, because I know some of our listeners will love to know how to do that. And that's all coming up in part 2.
Cobra is the very proud partner of Series 4 of the Plant-Based Podcast, joining in the celebration of plants, gardens and outdoor living. With over 60 models of lawnmowers available in the Cobra range, there's something for every garden. As a special offer for our listeners, Cobra is offering the chance to win exclusive prizes. Head over to cobragarden.co.uk to find out more.
Okay, so we're back in part 2, and we really want to pick Glynn's brains when it comes to lawns. So we want to find out how you get that successful lawn, one that you can have picnics on, you can sunbathe on, and doesn't become brown in the summer. But sometimes it's a little bit about planning in order to do that. So Glynn, we're actually going to do this a bit quick fire. Kind of want you to give us your top tips, first up, for weeds in the lawn.
For weeds in the lawn, you can either remove them by hand, just with what used to be called a daisy grubber or a knife or something to cut through them. But if you do cut through a plantain or a dandelion, just look at it for a moment and see how much pressure those leaves are pushing down on the ground. If you cut through the root, hold it up and you'll see that the leaves push down on the ground to suppress grasses and weeds. I know that's not quite a short answer, but there you go.
It's still a good answer.
Yeah. Raking the leaves before you mow, just a light rake will lift up leaves of weeds and allow the lawnmower to clip them off. Things like clover, it will also help to lift the runners to clip those and keep those under control. Lawn sand, it used to be a good way of controlling some of the broad-leaved weeds. Right. But in this day and age, perhaps we are more environmentally friendly and tolerant of some weeds in the lawn. It's only when they really get on top of you. Moss, of course, is an issue. If you have damp soil and drips from trees, you might like to think about raking that out and encouraging the grasses with feeding so that it doesn't come back as quickly.
Definitely, because, sorry, before we move on, is it right that feeding the lawn more actually stops weeds because the grass is then stronger and the weeds don't get a chance to grow? Is that true?
Yes, that can help. Yeah. You've got to always remember that if you feed the grass, you're also feeding the weeds. Yeah, so if you have weeds there...
So is there a specific type that would work better then?
Grasses depend on being clipped at a certain height. So if you have a mixture of grass seed varieties like fescues and bents and ryegrasses, there is an optimum height for that particular mix. So if you do go up and down, like cutting them really hard after coming back from holiday or on Good Friday, as everybody gets the mower out on Good Friday, taking the grass down really hard, you do need to feed it and revive it afterwards.
I love how our quick fire question round is already out of control, isn't it? Can I just say super quickly also that
amazing.
In the past, dandelions were meant to be in the, like, people loved having dandelions in the lawn. Yeah. It was like a thing, dandelion lawn was an excellent thing to have, and now people can't wait to get rid of them. I love them.
I like the insects that they attract, but there's many other weeds that will be in your lawn, whether it's speedwell or maybe you've got a rare one like parsley peart. I love these names. Daisies and clover. So in this day and age, being more environmentally friendly, we should tolerate these. And of course, watering lawns is perhaps not so well viewed on these days. We should all be saving water. The world is becoming a hotter, drier place. So where will we be in 50 years' time? Will we have a more Mediterranean style garden with palm trees and olive bushes, or and lawns may disappear into the background a little more? People's front drives used to be a colourful garden with a little square of lawn, and now they've become parking places. Perhaps we need more of these little oases, and the public parks are perhaps a good place to start if we keep those up for people to enjoy.
Well, I think that brings us on actually to the brown lawn question, talking about the climate and such like. So what's your advice midsummer of how to revive a brown scorched lawn?
In very hot conditions, you should perhaps raise the height of cut of your lawnmower so that you're not cutting as hard, and even allow the clippings to stay on the lawn because they will break down and feed it. The feeding will keep the lawn green. When the dews start to come in late summer, you can actually turn your lawn rake over and just knock the dew off the lawn with the back of the rake, and that will go into the ground and moisten it a little bit more rather than evaporating off the leaves. And,
this is a nice tip. That's a lovely tip.
And it's also good for keeping fungi down on lawns in the autumn.
Oh, nice.
Don't cut the lawn so hard. In later summer, you can apply a lawn fertilizer, which will it won't be nitrogen based, it'll be more phosphate and potash based, and that will harden up the grasses to see them through the winter. It will thicken up the lawn and help to prevent those weeds getting in. And if your lawn grasses are stronger, they'll have deeper roots and be able to reach the moisture as well. And that hopefully will keep the lawn greener next summer.
Do you know what? I do find that grass does have an extraordinary tendency to revive itself, even when you think it's awful. The following year, it soon seems to grow again. I mean, it might not be the most perfect lawn, but we don't have to have the most perfect lawn. Certainly, if we're not kind of on an estate or trying to keep a perfect formal garden, you know. But there's other lawn alternatives as well, aren't there? I've been growing some chamomile at my allotment, but I know chamomile lawns were once and are now becoming of interest to people more. And also creeping thyme as well are quite often used as well for smaller lawns. And I can remember going to see like a chateau somewhere in France, it was many years ago, and they had a creeping thyme lawn because they'd had one literally forever. It was kind of what they had many years ago. And it looked amazing. It looked absolutely beautiful. What do you think about lawn alternatives?
It depends on the size of lawn you're making. When I was at Kew, in front of Kew Palace, we had 2 chamomile lawns there. And every 3 or 4 years, we had to perhaps replant them or patch them up because they would go patchy. They also need clipping. So I would say for something like chamomile, have a small area that you can manage and put your time into. They used to make a seat, like a turf seat, but instead with chamomile. So when you sat on it, it gave off a beautiful scent. And if you give them a light shearing occasionally to keep them within bounds, you can use the chamomile clippings in chamomile tea, which is very soporific. I've seen adverts in the papers for thyme lawns, Thymus pilum, and its shades of pink and white. And I'm not sure about going whole hog for something like that. Maybe to start off in a small way by placing squeezing little thyme plants between the cracks in a paving area or on the edge of a paving area. So as they come out, you see the flowers and you tread on the foliage to give off the nice scent. And then if you find that starts to work for you and the plants spread, you can think about using them as a small lawn as well. But they won't take the wear to walk and tread and even sit on some of them.
I think that's great. And last week, I actually came across a really lovely wildflower turf that had wildflowers in it and grass. And it was from, I think it's Tiller's turf in Lincolnshire. And the reason I had it was we were turfing the footwell of a car.
As one does, yeah.
That's my punchline. It was a stunt we did on TV on Friday. But I was, in seriousness, I was really impressed with the lawn because it had a fragrance. And that fragrance was the thyme, because there was thyme in there. There was obviously different silene. There was daisies. It was really cool. And I think if I was going to have a lawn, Ella Mary, I would use that wildflower turf because it's really cool. And I wouldn't care about having it cut short. I maybe just have a path that is cut through it so I can access where I need to. But I'd be well up for that.
You still have to maintain it, though.
Here's an idea for you.
To a degree.
You don't have to have sedum on a roof. You could have sedum as a lawn. So all you're doing is
crushed underfoot, though.
It won't take a lot of wear. Maybe you could create some sort of a boardwalk or stepping stones, so that they took the majority of the pressure. You'd probably have to have a gravelly substrate underneath it. But you could also insert some summer bulbs like Zephyranthes, the flower of the west wind, Sternbergia lutea, autumn crocuses. But you don't just have to have a sedum roof on a roof.
Well, actually, what I thought you were going to suggest, which I think is a good idea, what about, where you usually have a roof and having a wildflower lawn on the roof?
Yes, you can get wildflower mixtures, but it's the dryness and drought that will mean that you've got to choose the right species of grasses. It would be nice to see the waving grasses in the breeze on a roof. As well as some of the wildflowers, but it's drought will prune the plants.
Cool.
Oh, that's so many nice ideas. It's got me thinking a little bit, actually.
Yeah, I mean, even on a balcony, you could almost have your lawn in a window box. And with a few crocus underneath the grasses, you could trim it with as little as a pair of scissors. You could insert the odd bedding plant like a white petunia or busy lizzie to give you a little bit of interest, and somewhere for your garden gnome to live.
Yes, I love that. Oh my gosh, this is a great idea. I think I'm gonna have a lawn in a container hanging over the balcony railings at my place. In fact, I might have a couple. And so it's like I've got a lawn on the balcony.
You could put your hands in it and send your hands at your legs.
Oh.
you can buy in some garden centres and shops little fairy gardens. So why not make a miniature garden in a bowl, a little bit of grass lawn that you clip, and some animals and little fairy castles. It's fun to get the kids to start gardening.
A little fairy garden as well. Oh, I might have to get my nail scissors out though if I've got a lawn in a pot, because I would need to have it nice and trim. Thank you so much.
We got one last question actually, but I think we might have answered it already about the no mow May. But I think we've kind of answered that with what we've been saying about wildflower lawns, haven't we?
Yeah, allowing the lawn not to get out of control, but to literally enjoy it for all the different diverse flowers that you could have in it. You do go to other properties and ours as well, where you have wildflower areas. At the moment in the garden, we have created a small mown patch in amongst all our tall buttercups and grasses, and our local Nightingale House hospice is raising money by selling metal bluebells. So we've placed 1,000 bluebells in this small area, and the mixture of nature and architecture is really working very well together.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It is beautiful. It sounds absolutely lovely. So, anyone listening, if you fancy a trip to Wrexham, then definitely go and pay Glynn's own garden and lawn a visit.
Be very welcome. Come and see us and give us a wave in the garden.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure chatting to you, and I'm desperately hoping that Michael's decided at least to have a little bit of lawn of some type.
I'll let you know.
Try a vertical lawn, a very dwarf type of grass, and sow it in a tray, an old metal bread crate with compost, and you could even have a vertical lawn.
Okay, and then I can throw myself against it as if I'm doing roly-polies or something.
If I haven't convinced you to have a lawn now, I never will.
Cool. Thank you for today, Glynn.
Really Thank you, Glynn. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Cobra is the very proud partner of Series 4 of the Plant-Based Podcast, joining in the celebration of plants, gardens and outdoor living. With over 60 models of lawnmowers available in the Cobra range, there's something for every garden. As a special offer for our listeners, Cobra is offering the chance to win exclusive prizes. Head over to cobragarden.co.uk to find out more.
The music for the Plant-Based Podcast is part of the song Grow by Mikey James, and our editor is Gareth Patch of Semi Echo.